Welcome our first speaker, Sven, who will talk about immersive theatre tech.
Good morning, hi. This is a topic I don't know a huge amount about, other than having been roped in about 2 years ago when I changed jobs by some theatre people who wanted to have things like blinken lights and weird sounds happening when their actors did certain actions without needing to have somebody sitting in the background doing the sound. So in my day job, I'm a DevOp. I've done a number of open source things, and I basically get to run small websites and small analysis tools as though they were big sites. And in my spare time, I get to build things about this size. So for those of you sitting at the back, you could defrag the room and come sit further forward, but at this size, I don't think it'll make much difference. So, immersive. I realized as I started writing this talk a week or two ago that my talk proposal did not spell anything legitimate. Immersive is spelt with an IMM. and it's like, so, I'm sorry about that. A lot of the way that I treat the work that I do with these things is, however, based on emergent behavior. Way back when I was at university, we had a robotics course where we were taught about Fred Brooks's subsumption architecture, where the way that Fred Brooks talked about, professor, he's also the guy who started the Roomba company and did a whole pile of other really big things, but the way subsumption architecture talks about systems is to say that you can break things up into a very small number of very simple behaviors, and out of that will emerge something that looks really complicated. And the classic example is a cockroach, where you basically say, go forwards is one behavior. The other one is when you see light, turn away from it and run. And I think there's a third one, but effectively those behaviors almost entirely map onto how a cockroach behaves. And so you'll see this behavior and you'll think that's an intelligent being, when in actual fact it's not. And so my spelling mistake is based around emerging things from really simple things. The group that I work with is called Folly Games, and they do live theatre acting in the round, essentially. Their biggest thing, actually, who here has been to Woodford? Seriously, like 4 or 5 of you, okay. The biggest thing they do, and they've been doing this for now 10 years, is that they run this thing called The Game, which is a big live role-playing game and theatre experience where they have somewhere between 30 and 50 actors who participate in certain factions, and then the average people like us, and I mean it's aimed essentially at 13 to 18-year-olds, and from 10 to 13 they get really involved. You go through these series of challenges and you can live action act with these people. One of the fun things that turns out is, of course, that while there is a script and there is an intended direction of the flow, the people who come along make this game into what it is, and they take it off into all sorts of strange directions. And so it's about immersing people into something that's embedded inside reality in one way or another. So the first thing I got involved in was a Convict's Hope, which was an add-on to the Brisbane Museum's Convict exhibition. And what they did is essentially make a 1-hour show in which they posed a series of puzzles, like in an escape game, for people to then go through the museum and try to figure out what happened and to solve the puzzles. And to give the actors some support, we added the 6 podiums, each of which was keyed to a particular object that they found in the museum, and would give different responses depending on which object was placed on the podium. And each of the podiums had a different personality and all sorts of things. And from an audience or participation perspective, this made them somewhat sentient and really interesting. Whereas from our computer IT point of view, basically it's an RFID reader with some RFID tags, audio output, and a whole pile of web files, which, as usual, sounds awfully easy and clinical, but the effect is incredible. For some reason, we managed to run this for 4 months with 4 shows every weekend with essentially, there were supposed to be 4 actors working in pairs, and most of the shows were done by 2 actors who were basically running around a lot of the time dealing with children because the kids were the ones being taken to these shows. And if you've ever worked with children in that kind of environment, you know how incredibly exhausting it is. They learned a heck of a lot. And they did a brilliant job. So the tech, the way I look at it is this is incredibly simple, but my brief was actually make this thing so that the actors can set it up because we won't be there. The only people who are going to be there are these 2 actors. There's no support personnel. And so it has to work, and it has to work for an hour. And you just kind of think that's going to be challenging. And literally, I think I got told about it a week beforehand because the other people dropped out. It came down to being 6 Raspberry Pis, 6 RFID scanners, audio output, that's it, done. And for some reason, to everybody's amazement, this worked for 4 months, non-stop. Every time the show came out, we plugged everything in, or they plugged everything in, turned it all on, and then put it all away and did it again, forwards, backwards. You can kind of imagine how scary that was from a tech point of view. Okay, so this is where I was curious to know, who are you all? Are you all IT people? Or are you more interesting than that and need to know more about tech than I can just whiz off and say it's done? Who here programs as a job? Okay, maybe I should ask it the other way. Who here doesn't program as a job? What do you all do? You want to come up here and introduce yourselves? Damn it. Oh, yeah. How many of you don't program and aren't sysadmins? Yeah, no, we need you guys to talk. Can you do a lightning talk?
I'm not sysadmins.
Yeah, not sysadmins, not programmers. As in not IT by profession, essentially. 1, 2, 3, 5. So there's 5 of you. So you're the people that I'd actually like to hear from because IT people are boring. Well, it's true. You know, we classically have to do our job by breaking it down, breaking anything interesting down into as boring components as possible so that we get something that works and maybe works more than once. And so in implementing this, I effectively went and did the same thing we're doing with all our big systems, you know, microservices or emergent behavior type things where we have a controller that says, when I see this happen, tell it to do that, but it doesn't do any of that work. And then I have another piece of software that basically, if it gets told, play this bit of audio, plays this bit of audio, and so on. And then, because this is a puzzle, we need to have a state where we get from one place to another until we get finished so that we can have the big finale sounds. And for those of you who don't work in tech, that's probably going to sound quite complicated, but it's not. It's brilliantly simple because the important and hard part about these shows is what the actors do. We're really there just to support them. Yeah, so this thing worked, and I was shocked. So the thing we wanted to do soon after, for last year's Woodford, so 2 months after that show finished, was to have magical dueling in the Woodford game. So out in the middle of nowhere, we have this electronics at a folk festival. And it's not supposed to feel electronic, it's supposed to just magically work. And so what we have here is, I think, day 5 of the festival, when finally we got it to the point where the people who were involved in getting us to do it could actually cast spells at each other. At this point, Tim is, I don't know, losing health, I think, which is why he's covered in smoke that's rainbow-coloured. I think it's supposed to be red, but you know, whatever. When we arrived, nothing worked. It was incredible. So Woodford is a folk festival, but it's run almost entirely by 10,000 volunteers. So just think about the horrific scale. The game, I think, only has around 100 and something volunteers. It's much, much smaller. But these volunteers turn up a month beforehand to build the sets and put things together and build costumes and do all sorts of amazing things. And then people like me turn up last minute and go, well, I'm going to need help now. And on top of that, so the fun thing about this is that if you compare that, where you see a little bit of the podium that we put down the object on, in what I assume is kind of normal theatre, we're reusing those same podiums, but we've kind of modified them a little bit, added, so Tegan there is touching some touch controllers that select different moves, where you can boost your spell or counter the other person's spell, that sort of thing. And then we've got a little NeoPixel health indicator. And then we also added an RFID, a UHF RFID reader, so that when you do that, it notices that your wand has broken into that beam and casts the spell. I wish we hadn't done that. Yes. It turns out that our RFID, like high-power RFID, is not only not circular, but is really hard to shape. And so, you put the wand behind you, and sometimes it triggers. Yeah. And then the other fun things we control is like the lights and the smoke machine and that sort of thing, and some audio. So the tech behind it is again, very similar to what we did before, but we've added a few extra little bits. And fundamentally, that there is the brains behind everything that is in the Raspberry Pi. And it's just a little tiny ESP board for which there's a whole pile of little daughter boards or shields. And then thankfully, 10 months later, we ended up doing a new show for a week or two as a preview for some of the ideas that we wanted to do at Woodford this year. And this is actually an open-air escape room where we have, you see the green glowing things in there are mushrooms that Tim built, that they're made out of normal silicon that you get for your bathroom and that sort of thing, just shaped in plastic wrap. But they look incredible. And then, so they indicate something about what stage of the escape room you're in. In the bed, there were some flowers that hopefully I've got pictures of, which move. And then the tree has some touch sensors where when the people touch it, the tree shivers. And depending again on where it is in the game, will either ignore you or say something, that sort of thing. And as is kind of usual for all this sort of thing, we arrive with all this hope and all these things that work. And a whole pile of extra other people have volunteered to help build speech recognition bits and all sorts of fun things like that. But everything goes wrong. Bizarrely, in a built-up suburban area, there's so much Wi-Fi after 6 p.m., i.e. showtime, that me sending out an MQTT message works for a while, and again, so it's not so bad here because the LCA Wi-Fi is actually done relatively professionally, but when you're surrounded by high-rise buildings, everybody has. So, it's full of learning. It's great. And then, to kind of finish with most of the pictures, this year's game, we decided not to do too much in the way of electronics for the game itself. I quickly built up a cauldron for the magician so that when people come and visit the magician and they do something, it billows up smoke and has some colors, you know, that sort of thing. But really, what we were doing was setting up an environment like that one to set up for next year's game. And so one of the fun things about the game is that this game world, they've been running it for 7 years. So this is the second one, as I understand it. And starting next year, there will be a new game world, which they have to firstly introduce and then teach people about. And I'm sorry, I can't wax lyrical about the game. I have only seen it this year because my kids turned 10 and finally didn't want to go to the kids' festival. And so we were actually able to play the game a little bit, but from the eyes of a 10-year-old, which basically meant visiting all of the actors and talking to the ones that they weren't frightened of, and doing challenges that weren't massively challenging. I mean, the most challenging challenge that one of my daughters was given was high-five 100 people. And it took minutes for her to get to the point where she was willing to interact with strangers. And then after that, she was basically running up and saying high five and doing it until the person who gave her the challenge got bored because they realized 100 would take an hour. At which point they went, here, you win. You know, it's, yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. This is where I have no real experience with theatre, but this is a, you know, hundreds of people type thing with a month worth of people building things on site. And, you know, so from my perspective, it's massive, and they don't actually figure out what they want to do with what I'm doing until maybe the week before Woodford. You know, so they build their beautiful big set, and then somebody comes along and starts adding pieces. And even worse, I'm not there. So what I did at the beginning of December is build them a box that contained a whole pile of pieces. And so, for example, this here is an ESP8266 board with a little bit of extra electronics, well, actually just some wiring, to talk to these NeoPixels. And so with a bit of programming later on, we can make them do all sorts of interesting things. And then similarly, one of these boards with some wires hanging out for touch control. And do I have anything else? I don't have them here because it's all still in the box of stuff, but you know, nice big massive servos that can make things move, and motors that can spin. And last minute somebody went, hey, can we have a relay? Luckily, again, you can AliExpress all of this stuff, including relay boards. And so from the you know, the point of view of I don't have time to design a board, I don't really have the skills anymore either, this stuff is awesome. And then to cover for those network issues, I went out and bought a nice big Ubiquiti mesh network thing. And so suddenly we have awesome Wi-Fi. It works really well. And then we also have some USB DMX controllers, which, like last year, I don't have any time.
You just said AliExpress and last minute, like right next to each other.
Yes.
Have you developed matter transportation technology or something?
This is what I really should talk about in the next talk tomorrow, where, yes. So
I work with artists and they're always like, I need to do this last minute. And it's like, okay, well, you get to pay the expensive local store. If you came 3 weeks ago, you pay nothing and we get it from China.
this is exactly why I have a day job. When I started 2 years ago, I basically went out and started ordering pieces that I thought would be reusable. And so I have a huge-ish library of junk. And when Tim comes to me and says, hey, can you do this? It's like, yep, it's going to cost you this much. And he goes, sure. because I already have most of the pieces. Yeah, no, I expect that next month we will have another round of ordering from AliExpress and waiting the 6 to 9 weeks. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. But that said, these things are so simple and generic that, you know, just having a whole stack of these little boards that are really, I always try to avoid saying this, but they are really easy and simple to program to make them do things, is really awesome. You know, if you have to do something custom, then it takes time, or if you have to do something unusual, sure. But with these, 90% of my code is directly out of the examples, because that's all we need. And then I add a little bit of MQTT messaging to it so that I can control it. So in the previous iteration of this, we started using Node-RED so that I didn't need to go and write some Python code. We could get some volunteers to do it. And like most years, this year, we had, I think, 2 tech volunteers. One of them was a student, or is a student from QUT, and he basically turned up and went, I don't know anything about this stuff, and played. And the end result was that he was the one who wrote, I think, the DMX interfacing, and then made all of the things that were installed mostly work. And then Trent came along and did a heck of a lot more stuff. That the most amazing thing about this is the set they built, and it's about the size of this area. You know, it's pretty big, and they've installed electronics all over the place. I have no idea where most of the electronics are. I think my kids know better, because they went round and touched everything and saw what moved and figured out what triggered what. So somewhere in here is an RFID reader that, if you put the right prop with an RFID tag on, makes smoke billow out of the tree. I literally have no idea where that is, and I have no idea what the programming for that is. All I know is that the pieces that we put together meant that our volunteers could write a little bit of Node-RED control software and make it happen, which is absolutely amazing. And yeah. Oh, look. And so Node-RED effectively is a thing where you can drag and drop inputs, outputs, and a series of instructions into. And we even started using Blockly for some of that, because our director isn't a programmer, he's a theatre director. And he started making puzzles that then actuate things, which is so much fun. And so I'm just going to go through a whole pile of the props in the last 5 minutes. 5 minutes, right? This is an octopus that they built, but it moves. And so when you touch that emblem in the middle, or any of the chains, the capacitive touch triggers and makes it move. And then there's audio that seems to go on with it. I don't know whether it's related or it's just ambient. It was phenomenal. And all that is one of these little boards with a little linear motor that goes forwards and backwards on command. That's it. These mushrooms, those things, they're spectacular. Yeah, no. So to me, these are the highlight of the show. These are the flowers I was talking about before. Basically, underneath there is a board that rises and falls on a servo. Again, really simple little mechanism. And I don't know, but it had something to do with the plot. But being immersed in trying to make this stuff work, yeah. This here is effectively the next RFID thing. And what you can see there hanging is a cup with an RFID tag on it. And if I got my maths right, that's one of the things that happened when they put the Thunder Cup on the tree stump. The other thing that happened, so that's close up, is it starts raining. Which, you know, one of the things about Woodford is it's dusty, it's horrible, it's hot, and people are always looking for ways to cool down. And so they built in a sprinkler system into this so that during the daytime, This whole set is open to the public, and they can run around and do anything, but the tree is asleep. And so there's this background noise of a tree snoring. And then there's kids who run up and get this cup after having, of course, organised for their parents to stand in the shade of the tree. You know, it's just amazing, the simple little things that then create these wonderful behaviours. Yeah, so I will be talking a little more about the tech details in this in my next talk tomorrow. But yeah, the thrill of working with theatre is amazing, but there is that caveat that if you're doing tech stuff, then you're breaking all of this awesome stuff down into boring, simple things, and you do kind of lose the magic until you go in and see it. So I was absolutely blown away with this. And for those of you who do tech, I highly recommend you do stuff like this. Yeah, you know, work with people who are not in tech. Not only will you learn something, but you get to see the most amazing ad lib things happen. You know, the finale for this was one of the actors dressed up with a glowing orb costume that I don't have a photo of. And she came out at, I think, 8 o'clock or so at night. And you know, the kids had been playing for an hour in this area trying to solve a puzzle that didn't exist. And suddenly, for the next 15 minutes, this group of 20 children, all the way from nothing to, I don't know, 17, 18, were basically standing there transfixed by this figure that was just walking, didn't say a word. And they were offering her other lighting up things that they'd found or that they'd brought. It was just amazing. Yes, so it makes breaking it down and killing it worth it. There you go. Mostly thanks to people who go to art, because otherwise life would be 3 bits. Yeah. Thank you. If you have questions, we can talk later in the in the breaks.
Awesome. So can we join with me in thanking Sven for that?